If they don't know, then nobody knows, of course, and it must be in your head. That's basically what they told me, except for a neurologist who told me that I had some slight neuropathy and I needed to gain some weight. One of the most significant symptoms was extreme pain when experiencing any emotion. It didn't matter if it was a good emotion, positive or a negative one. They did all their diagnostics and the doctor looked at me and they said, if you had come any later, you were on your way for something catastrophic. And at this point, I was 18 years old and I was just thinking, well, that's word for word. I can't forget being told that. And even my mom was telling me, she's like, I really like that you're into the whole health thing, but please put on some pounds because you do not look healthy. That's really what I don't think that anyone should be consuming fruit thinking that it's innocuous. If anything, it would be more damaging because of the fructose.
All right, I'm happy. Today we're going to be chatting with Eddie Goeke, who is going to give us some insight into some things. So Eddie, if you don't mind, for those that aren't familiar with you, just tell us who you are, a little about yourself.
Yeah, so I am Eddie Goeke. I'm 20 years old, and I'm a pretty incipient health influencer, I guess you could say. It's odd calling myself that. Ever since January 20th of this year, carnivore health influencer in particular, I basically was just a normal kid, really, growing up. Had a normal life until about 16 years old, freshly after turning 16. I ended up having symptoms of a very arcane little condition that we now know of, but back then we didn't know what it was. And it was very weird. My very first symptom was just this random panic attack that was instigated by butterflies that I felt in my stomach in my chemistry class in particular. I was just sitting there and it was warm, and I just remember my heart pounding. I had just gotten out of my strength class. So it wasn't very odd that was happening, but what was really odd was the feeling that I started to get in my stomach. It was almost as if I was feeling scared from a stimulus that I wasn't even aware of. It's very hard to explain it, but I ended up having a panic attack without knowing what it really even was, and that was my first symptom. And then from then on, I was having to skip days of school and then entire weeks because of POTS symptoms, postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, where I would just stand up and my pulse rate and blood pressure would just go way up until I sat down again. And sometimes it eventually got to a point where my homeostasis really was a heart rate of 130 BPM. It was not healthy. It was very scary. Doctors would just tell me that it was all anxiety, of course, the very said ad nauseum within the medical community now to patients, because if they don't know, then nobody knows, of course, and it must be in your head. That's basically what they told me, except for a neurologist who told me that I had some slight neuropathy and I needed to gain some weight. That was his solution to all my symptoms. It was ridiculous. But everything just got worse and worse, but I kept being told it's all in your head. Not to disparage my family, because I'm close with my family, but there were members of my family in my immediate family as well, that told me the same thing. And when you're told that over and over again, you actually, many of the viewers may understand this. I'm sure that they do. Even though you don't believe it, you almost start to believe it in a way. You start to believe what they're saying. It's conditioning. So I naturally had a sort of aversion to not doing things. I felt like I was lazy even when I had a good reason to not do something. And so I pushed myself way too hard. I kept going to school. I took what they said to heart, of course. Of course, I never played the, well, I'm injured card when I very clearly was. I went to work. I was actually almost forced into getting a job during quarantine, during the lockdowns. So ironically, I actually got a job during the lockdowns as a Walmart sales associate, which sounds like it'd be a sinecure. It'd be a very easy, laid back job, except I was working in the warehouse area all day. So it wasn't. I was wearing my body down, and that was still 16, 17 years old. And I did that for years. And everything just continued to get worse. I had one of the most significant symptoms was extreme pain when experiencing any emotion. It didn't matter if it was a good emotion, positive or a negative one. I couldn't actually.
Let me just clarify a couple of things here. So first, where were you during all the lockdown stuff? What part of the world are you in?
I'm in Illinois, United States.
You're in Illinois. And then when you say extreme pain, are you talking about physical pain, or is it emotional? Where was the pain coming from in your experience?
It was physical pain. It was around my abdominal area. It was where your fight or flight nerves are, your thoracic lumbar area.
So really bad gut pain when you had some kind of sort of stressful type of situation. So we often see this sensitization of things like that. Okay.
Yeah, and it was primarily it was around my stomach, but it was nerve pain in the bone surrounding it. And I'll get to what the condition is in just a second, because I'm just trying to give some preface, because my story is a long one. And so I'm shortening it, I'm condensing it. But that pain would shoot all the way up into my neck, my hyoid area, and it would spread all the way down into my legs. It was very intense. And so I actually it got to a point where I couldn't watch television. I couldn't watch anything, because if you're experiencing any emotions, I couldn't handle it. So eventually I worked myself into the dirt, really, still not knowing what was going on, still trying to look into what was happening just on my own, independent research, and couldn't find anything. Till January 9th of 2022, everything hit the fan. I couldn't walk anymore. I was completely debilitated. I had to quit my job. And right around that time, I figured out, I found something that, I was desperate, because the entire month of February that year was I never saw my family. I never saw friends. I spent my life waking up, staring at the ceiling, all the way until I went to bed that night. My father, I was staying with, and he had to make food for me. Couldn't get up to make myself food. It was all stemming from it was systemic pain, but it was primarily around the abdominal area, like I just explained. And eventually, all I had to do was basically, I was anticipating my death. I genuinely thought I was going to die. There was no hope for me. And so all I did was I spent time looking into what was going on with me. And then I found something, and it was a lead. And it was basically this condition called CCI, craniocervical instability, which is characterized by an instability of the ligaments within the cranial spine. Ligaments being what hold bone to bone. So basically what would happen is, if I did have that, the bones in my cervical spine would move around too much, impinge on the surrounding nerves and arteries, causing damage. And I thought, if it impinges on your vagus nerves, which are very important nerves, that stem all the way throughout your body, and they're important in regulating emotion, I thought, that's a lead. It's enough of one. So we booked an appointment with someone, a clinic in Florida, Cary Medical, Florida, that specializes in actually treating the condition regeneratively through PRP and Prolotherapy treatment. We got there, and they did all their diagnostics, and the doctor looked at me and they said, if you were on your way, if you had come any later, you were on your way for something catastrophic. And at this point, I was 18 years old, and I was just thinking, well, that's word for word. I can't forget being told that. And so I've been undergoing treatments with them for a while. But how does this relate to carnivore, right? Because that's why I'm here. I believe, and I was diagnosed with hypermobile EDS. That is the condition. It is characterized, CCI is craniocervical instability. HEDS, hypermobile EDS, is that condition, but for your entire body. So all my ligaments are weak. Now, the reason that I say that this relates to carnivore is, yes, hypermobile EDS is a genetic condition. However, I have this on my channel as well. I've had suspicions about whether my developmental process, what I ate during that time, and more importantly, what I didn't eat, had a role to play in at least exacerbating the condition. I grew up eating very little animal protein. My first hamburger was eaten at 10 years old in a Mexican restaurant, and I didn't even eat the whole thing. And that's what we're talking about. That's the degree that we're talking about. I had some chicken breasts here and there. I had some tiny bits of dairy, whatever, but it was mainly plant-based. And I've had speculation, because whenever I was going through all of this, I was adamant that diet was a big part of it, because what else could be happening? It just led me into the diet sphere, even though my condition is a genetic condition. And once I learned all that stuff, I thought, well, maybe that had something to do with it. I adopted carnivore after learning everything that I learned in the process of staying in Florida. And it is the best metabolically I've ever felt. My abdominal condition is characterized by weak ribs. That's what's causing the problem. I could actually, every time I laughed, my ribs would thud. And they still do that, because it was so severe that even though we've gotten so much treatment, it's a slower process. It is an ameliorable condition. I will be completely fixed at some point. It's just a slow process. But that being said, eating would make things worse, therefore. So what carnivore has helped with especially is, it may seem like a trivial detail, but I don't have to eat as much. I don't have to eat as much at all, and that actually helped a lot during that treatment process. I would eat one time, and then I would be out of commission for that set of 3 hours postprandially, but that was relieving. I was trying to catch any bit of relief that I could. So metabolically as well, I think it's expedited my treatments. The treatments are characterized by rebuilding of the collagen within the ligaments. It works very effectively. It does do exactly what they say it does. And so that is something else that I'd like to add in. But my story is a little unique because mine is a genetic condition that during the studying and the analysis of what it was that was causing it led me into learning all of these different things about diet. It led me into this sphere. If anyone's familiar with the channel, and I'll give this as a sort of final note because I know that I could talk all day. My channel focuses around being this sort of acrimonious I put on this pretentious play on my channel. It's what I do because nowadays people like the acrimony. It's like trying to educate people normally and it just doesn't work really. But I'm saying a bunch of stuff that people say, how do you learn all this? And I go, during that time that I was out of commission, I was staying in Florida for months, but I was staying in one room, a bedroom. I couldn't enjoy the weather there. It's not like I could enjoy the setting there. I was just locked in a room, metaphorically locked. And all I had to do was either play a bunch of video games if I wanted to, which I was like, I better make my time worth it here, better do something. And so I just started studying. And at first it was the wrong types of science and all that stuff. But then I started looking into college level courses about biochemistry and applying it to things like diet, the human body, of course. And I just started thinking, there's a lot of lies in this sphere. There's other people that are sick like me that actually are a direct result of diet. And the problem is these people haven't found an answer like I have, and yet they're listening to the people that I've been listening to for, I don't know, years. And this is what they're being taught. I only started to learn how wrong it is when I start learning like hard sciences and such. So I'm still on a journey in terms of healing, but also learning. Eventually I want to actually be able to, I'm ambivalent about going back to school because we know how of veracity those are, the universities now. But I want to actually learn how to perform science. It's one thing to learn things that other scientists have discovered in our existence, but it's another thing to actually be able to conduct it. So I don't know, that's my goal. It's figuring out, it's fully getting treated from a condition that is genetic, but I think was exacerbated by a poor diet. And while simultaneously learning more and teaching more people along the way through my channel and also my social media pages, which I'm currently inactive on, but I wasn't before. I'm taking a little hiatus from it. But that is my story in a very small nutshell. We can expound upon more of it if you'd like. Ask, that's why I'm here. Questions, answer questions.
Yeah, I've got several comments and questions. POTS EDS, general category, which you fall into. I've seen that happen. I've seen that with a number of patients now where their chronic subluxation dislocations improve. And it was really perplexing to me because I was like, this is a genetic collagen disorder. How does diet impact that? But it just does. And maybe you've obviously got a lot of insight into your condition. And I applaud you as I learned a lot from patients that had a disease because particularly as an orthopedic surgeon, there's some stuff I don't see very often. And I certainly don't spend a lot of time on it. And the patient lives with it, like you said, 24/7, locked in a room, either physically or mentally. And some people will just, basically outsource their health decisions to other people, and other people are more proactive. And they're saying, look, this is my problem. I have the biggest to gain or lose in here. So why not become an expert in the condition that I'm dealing with? And I applaud you for doing that. You're obviously very bright. Not everybody knows what the hyoid bone is. I know you're putting some language there that most people don't realize. They got a little bone floating around in their neck that no one's ever heard of. But let me ask you, because this I don't know the answer to this, quite honestly. And maybe because you've lived with this, you've maybe had more insight. Why would you propose that a carnivore diet could impact a collagen disorder to the point where I saw people that were dislocating no longer dislocate? Because to me, it didn't make sense very, very much, or at least I've seen so many amazing things with this diet, but that's one of them that I'm still out there going, maybe it's this, maybe it's that. But have you delved into why the diet, in fact, outside of the PRP and the prolotherapy, has been impactful for you?
Yeah, so of course, it's really theoretical at this point. Even scientists, like you just said, most people don't know how that can happen. But I have some pretty, in my opinion, compelling theories. They're pretty enticing. First of all, we know that collagen, whether it's type 1, type 2, type 3, there's different types. They're all composed of, or ligaments, are composed of collagen, whether it's type 1, type 2, or type 3. And collagen is composed of a bunch of amino acids, basically. You need amino acids to build collagen. And we know, of course, that amino acids are highly concentrated in meat and animal products, but that's a superficial explanation, in my opinion. Yeah, it makes sense. But you can also synthesize amino acids and get them from plants, can't you? There is the bioavailability argument, and that's where I'm going to go into this. Bioavailability is important, and one of the things that I think happens is we know that plant proteins, there's plenty, like lectins, for example, that are not incorporated into bodily tissues. So even if you think you're getting protein from plants, for example, which is the predominant food that I ate growing up, and a lot of people are eating growing up nowadays, especially in my generation, we know that those are not incorporated into bodily tissues and they're highly prevalent in plants. So even though there are proteins in plants and there's amino acids in plants, how well is the body synthesizing those? There's some evidence that 14% of broccoli protein and soy protein isolate is incorporated into bodily tissues, but 80% of egg protein is. So that, I think, over the course of an entire developmental process, from ever since you're eating solid food to, I don't know, teenage years where development really takes place in terms of finalizing, ossifying structures and stuff, that could very well play a role. Again, it's theoretical. The thing that's perplexing, and I think even for you said it's perplexing, is that not only is it helping people to incorporate meat during their developmental years to hedge against this, or potentially hedge against this problem, this condition, it's helping people that are already fully developed. That's something that's very interesting, because you only have one chance to develop, right? The PRP treatment is bordering on the line of a second development, but technically, you only have one chance to develop. My theory in that regard, how it's fixing people that have already developed fully but have hypermobile EDS, even if it's not curing their condition, I think it's because we also know that there are other plant proteins that actively erode things like joints. Again, alluding to lectins. It's very pernicious. It's an insidious process. It's a gradual one. But if you're constantly inundating yourself with plant compounds that are damaging, not only lectins, but oxalates that deposit in joints, that can theoretically, once again, to use that word, I don't want to be too convicting here, they can erode the joints and the ligaments. So if you are incorporating bioavailable amino acids, that can help hedge against it, in my opinion. But also simultaneously, as a consequence of that, if you're lowering your intake of plant compounds that are deleterious, that can also help the body engage in its own self-healing properties and processes to reheal the ligaments. Once again, even if it doesn't heal the condition fully. Because if you get to a point like me, I'm sorry, diet will help, and I definitely encourage people to I'm an advocate for the carnivore diet for many reasons. But seeking out regenerative treatment is probably it is almost indefinitely, if you get to my degree of sick, disordered, that's inexorable, let's just say. You're going to have to do it. It's unavoidable, I think.
One of the things, because treatment, since you talked about the prolotherapy, which is basically injecting sugar into tissues, and the PRP, platelet-rich plasma, as an orthopedic surgeon, I was exposed to all of those with varying results. And one of the things I say is, if we look at the Academy, Orthopedic Academy's sort of opinion on these sort of things, whether it's stem cells, they're all kind of meh. We don't know, there's good data on that to show that it works one way or the other. There's not strong evidence. But what I will say is that if you are in a metabolically disastered state and you're continuing to basically poison yourself, any intervention that you attempt, any biohack, you can stand in front of all the red light screens you want to. If you don't stop poisoning yourself, none of this will have a chance of being efficacious. And I think it'd be interesting to see if these interventions are truly effective, if you can get away from the continued damage. It's like antidotes don't do any good if you're continuously poisoning yourself. So I'll just put that sort of little thought out there, because that's something that I'm very skeptical about most things, to be honest, even though I'm on this crazy, wacky, fringe nutritional thing. But just because I've seen such overwhelming results, it's hard to deny. But a lot of this stuff I'm very skeptical of. And you'd mentioned instability, because you said I think you said cervical cranial instability syndrome. Were you having actual joint subluxations and dislocations and that type of stuff at some point? Because obviously when you start dislocating or subluxing your vertebra, it's a problem. It's a real problem, in fact. Your shoulder popping out of joint sucks, but you don't have the potential neurological consequences to the degree you do with the spine. So what are your thoughts on that statement about diet as a base requisite for these things to be effective?
Oh, yeah, I definitely agree with that. And it may not be here's the thing. I think it's primarily the case for 95, 99% of conditions. I think there's some that are there are genetic predispositions to things, and maybe some other interventions are required. But for 99 of conditions, of course, I agree with that. The thing is that you asked me if I had any actual subluxations. Yes, they weren't completely dislocations of joints. It wasn't to that degree. The degrees of severity for people, it really just depends on their body. Sometimes even just a few millimeters of motion can cause extreme pain to the nerves surrounding them. And then other people with EDS can completely dislocate their hip and it feels like nothing to them, which is seen in the clinic that I spend a lot of my time in getting treated. Mine was not complete dislocations like that, but I'm just someone that has that higher propensity for the neurological issues that occur. And you said that, I want to clarify something because it may sound like I'm being a little desultory and sporadic. I'm just covering the things that you had mentioned. You mentioned that you're skeptical of types of treatment like that. And so am I. In fact, I actually was I was worried about going there. If I would have been almost discouraged from going there if it weren't so bad. I was desperate. It was desperation. But after what I've experienced, I want to clarify that usually PRP, at least currently right now in the United States, many clinics engage in PRP. The problem that I see, because we have one just like 15 minutes away from here, the problem that I see is that they will inject like 1 or 2 injections into a joint. And then it's okay, let's see how you feel. The clinic I visit injects me with over 100 all over my body. And so that can definitely expedite the process. But even just putting a needle in the ligament can stimulate inflammation and inflammatory cascade, even without a solution to. I want to be fair to the people that only inject 2 injections because they're still poking it with a needle. But I want to clarify that because a lot of people may think that it's not efficacious if they're looking at clinics that are looking at treatments that involve the introduction of 2 injections into a joint or something. The clinic also engages in stem cell therapy as well from bone marrow, but that's more expensive. So I haven't gotten that done. But yeah, with respect to the original posed question though, do I think that diet is the first thing that people should change? Absolutely. Definitely. 100%. And I've experienced that firsthand, what diet has changed, has altered for me. Even though it was secondary given the severity of my condition, I know what changed. I felt the changes myself.
Fair enough. Like I said, I'm the last person to discount a person's experience because that's what this whole carnivore diet has been predicated on. Just a number of people coming forward and sharing that they've had some success with various things. So I'm the last one to question. I question everything, but I hold it as evidence, and I think it's important evidence. Let me ask you collagen, because one of the things we're talking about, vitamin C, is utilizing collagen synthesis. When we consume collagen, there's things called hydroxyproline and hydroxylysine, which I'm sure you're familiar with, which we do actually have, dipeptide transporters that can suck those things up so they can be absorbed intact. So there's some evidence of that because I have looked into some of this stuff, and it's interesting. Like, we don't have any. There are literally, I don't know if there are any EDS studies versus any diet. There might be. Maybe you looked into that. I certainly, there's none on carnivore as of yet. Maybe there will be a few years if we continue to hopefully get some funding and being able to do these studies. But let me ask you, because you said your channel is basically very acrimonious. You're squabbling a lot about different things, and you're absolutely right. Social media is that's what works, unfortunately, for good or bad. That's why you have to play the game, so to speak, to get the message out there. And so what has been the response? Because when you said you're a 16-year-old kid, you're sick, you don't know what the hell's going on, your doctors say, hey, just gain some weight, and why do I have this? I don't know. Maybe it's bad luck. Maybe it's genetics. Who knows? It's very unsatisfying, the answers you get and the treatments that are probably proposed. Did you gain weight, by the way? How's the diet been with your weight? Apparently, maybe you were too thin. I don't know. Has that made a difference? And what are you eating these days?
Yeah, so what's ironic is that neurologist told me that whenever so I'm 5 and I was about, I think, 145 pounds then. And currently, I'm 137 and my symptoms are much better. So that's the irony there. He told me to gain weight because he found some slight neuropathy in my elbows and said, in order to fix that, you need to gain weight in order to add some insulation, basically was the theory, in the form of fat.
Okay. So he thought you had a compression neuropathy and you were just pushing on your elbows too much or something along those lines. Was that his thought?
Yeah, basically. But it was a very perfunctory, it was a very like hand wavy kind of diagnosis. And he just walked out of the room. That's the thing. I live in a part of Illinois that is a medical dead zone. And so the doctors are like that. Unfortunately, it seems to be the case. It's becoming ubiquitous across the United States. But anyway, back then it was I was like, really? I thought you're supposed to tell me some more than that. So back then, of course, I was still eating just regular food. I was eating high sugar stuff. Even whenever I was trying to be healthier, because I thought that diet was a big role in my condition, I was it's instilled into you that plants are good. So I tried to eat all of the plants I could, eating the rainbow, stuff that I didn't even, it was like, it's good for me, so I better do it. The only meat that I was eating really was chicken breast. So it wasn't even fatty meat. It was lean meat. And I limited that as well because I was under the assumption that fat is bad, basically. So that's what I was eating back then. And then what ended up happening was I discovered, what was it first? It was Whole30 at one point. I think it was paleo first. It was paleo, the paleo diet I discovered first. And it was right around the age 17 that I discovered it. Maybe 18. And I was eating it and I was still having some heat flashes and some muscle twitching, which now we know is the nerves firing and causing it's the muscles trying to stabilize my ligaments and stuff. But foods were definitely making it act up. So I was thinking, okay, let's try paleo. And it still was causing me issues. So then someone told me about the Whole30 diet, cutting legumes and grains and dairy out, basically, and added sugar. Keep the natural sugars in, though, because those are totally different. That I think I remember maybe it was a placebo, but I do think that helped a little bit. It still didn't help enough, though. And then I discovered lectins were the first plant toxins I ever learned about. And then I was thinking grains and all these other things aren't the only foods with lectins. So then I looked into what else did. And then I came across Dr. Stephen Gundry, who you've probably heard of at least once before within the space. People have heard of him. He's not the worst. He knows that plants have toxins in them, but he's very focused on lectins. So I adopted his diet. I lost too much weight, and not in the form of just fat and water. I was emaciated at that point because I was primarily eating a vegetarian diet with some animal protein sprinkled in here and there. And that wasn't sufficient. That wasn't adequate. We know why that is. But even my mom was telling me, she's like, I really, you're into the whole health thing, but please put on some pounds because you do not look healthy. Like she told me. I was like, of course, since I was so sick, I was like, no, I have to listen to I have to listen to my judgment because everyone else has seemed to fail me. So I'm my own boss. And then during my treatments in Florida, because I stuck with the lectin-free Gundry diet for a while, I did come across Dave Asprey. And so I started incorporating more animal protein in, but still maintaining the whole lectin-free kind of thing. And I thought it would still help with my treatments and stuff. So I might as well just add it in. And then I discovered Paul Saladino and added the whole meat and fruit thing. It seems to be a common theme within the carnivore space where we come across Paul Saladino first, and then we go on to the carb-free Anthony Chafee route. Yeah, I did eat a meat and fruit diet, and that was the first time that I had ever experienced extreme heat flashes, like sweating after I ate, blood pressure increases that were ostensibly directly correlated to the consumption of the food, increased heart rate, and just redness in my face. It wasn't great. It wasn't a good experience. I did that for about a month. And then I came across Bart K in August of that year, as some of us do. And I remember when I first came across him, I did not like him. I couldn't stand him, which is a very also common response, a common experience. But I kept watching his video because I was like, he's making sense. So he was critiquing Paul Saladino. I think that was also really because I was venerating Paul in my mind because again, desperation at its heart right there. It's like I came across someone, seems to know what he's talking about, sounds enticing. But no, I ended up adopting his philosophy. I said, well, you know what? Okay, let me try it. I don't know if he's right, but he seems qualified. And let's go and see what happens. So then I adopted the carnivore diet, which is completely bereft of carbs, except for the first week. I did keep a sweet potato in because it's advised not to jump right into it. So some people can do that, and some people have done it with no problems. I didn't want to be that person. So I didn't do the whole 6 to 8 weeks thing, but I did the 2-week thing. And since then, I've been strict carnivore. That was August of 2022 that I did that. And recently, I am still carnivore, but I've branched out a little bit. Sometimes I'll have some like pepperoni and salami here and there. I pick at it. So I'm not like the most strict and puritanical. I'd like to be. I really would. I'm having a problem since I'm so isolated in my home that if there's other food, because I live with my girlfriend right now and she's also on that route, but she's not as strict because she's just trying to get there, right? She's using all of these assisting compounds and all that stuff to help her get more strict, basically, is what's going on. So there's other food in the house that is still carnivore, but since it's in the house and I'm isolated in the house, I will find myself picking at it more. So recently I've been less strict, but I don't have carbohydrates. I do not have carbohydrates. That is the one thing that is constant. So
yeah, I want to just And I'm not going to deny there's many people that have success with all different manners of diets. There are people living in wherever that have lived 100 years and they've eaten plenty of carbohydrates. So clearly they affect other people differently. Maybe different people have tolerances. Maybe if you have this genetic predisposition or disease, that there's some things you have to do that other people might not have to do. But you'd mentioned early on, you almost a little bit, I could tell a little bit of an undercurrent of questioning about the fact that natural sugars are totally different and safe relative to, say, high fructose corn syrup. What are your thoughts on it? Because there are a lot of people that will say that the repeat group that we body prefers sugar, we need lots of sugar, we can have fruit all we want, and perhaps even we can drink Mexican Cokes because it has cane sugar as opposed to. What are your thoughts on the whole natural sugars are fine, whereas these man-made concentrated sugar things are so much different? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that there's some differences. For example, when you, not with respect to the sugar molecules themselves, but the sources of the sugar, if you're going to eat, let's say, an apple versus just drinking straight sugar water effectively when you're talking about a Coca-Cola, I believe that, yes, we know that fiber will slow the rate of absorption. Sure. People say that as if it's a good thing, and I think it's better because most of the damage that occurs when consuming sugar happens at the spike. Not exactly the undulating curve that occurs if you eat it in a fruit. Not saying that no damage occurs in that circumstance, but another thing that prevents a spike, though, is not eating it at all. So that's another thing to throw in there. But I'm being a little tangential. Yeah, with respect to the sugar molecules, fructose, glucose, galactose, and then the disaccharides, sucrose, table sugar, and all that. If you observe them under a microscope, they're the exact same molecule. They're the exact same. So people will say that natural fruit, there's other things associated with it. When you have the sugar contained within an apple, for example, there's other things that are within the fruit, exclude the fiber, just the nutrients that they refer to it as the food matrix. And I think Paul says that word for word, Paul Saladino, and I'm not disparaging him here. I'm just referencing because I heard the term from him first. He said, call it the food matrix. And then I hear other people saying it exists within the food matrix. So it's fine. It reacts differently. I have not seen any evidence of that would be whatever my opinion means to anyone else, because I don't have any letters following my name, any initials. But from my opinion, I've seen nothing that tells me that. I've seen nothing whatsoever that would even remotely convince me that is the case. That natural sugar found in fruit is metabolized differently than the man-made, which sort of is a little misleading even of itself, because it's not like we went into a lab and actually artificially made the sugar. We're concentrating it from plants a lot of times. So even then, it's still not man-made. We just concentrated it. I've seen no evidence that they're metabolized differently. The only thing that differs is the ratios I've seen. The ratios of sugar within sucrose, table sugar, is exactly 50-50 between glucose and fructose being 7 to 10 times, I've heard even 7 to 11 times more glycating and damaging, really, than glucose. And fruit has even more fructose in it. So if anything, if you're going to gauge the innocuous nature or the most innocuous form of sugar, if you're going to eat it, it would actually not be the fruit, it would be the artificial sugar by that criteria. So that's really what I don't think that anyone should be consuming fruit thinking that it's innocuous. If anything, it would be more damaging because of the fructose. But again, you have to consider the fiber as well, slowing the spike. There's a lot of things to consider. But the easiest thing, in my opinion, is just completely omit it entirely because it's not necessary.
Yeah, I would certainly concur it's unnecessary. Some people derive some level of hedonic pleasure from it or something like that. And it's one of the arguments that's often made very strongly by many people is that outside of caloric excess, which is a different sort of calculation, that even high fructose syrup is, and obviously there's other people that would strongly disagree with that, but we see that we know that there's industry funded studies that are showing that sugar is fine, and if you long as you don't eat too much, and then a lot of people struggle with that because it's very difficult to moderate, or in many cases impossible for many people. So do you think because what we'll see is saturated fat in a hypercaloric setting there's studies that suggest that can lead to things like fatty liver and so on and so forth. And my counter argument to that often is it's hard to be hypercaloric on a carnivore state. It's not possible. It is hard for many people. And the food matrix, if you will, to use Saladino's word, or I'm sure he didn't coin that, but meat is very different than just a bag of saturated fat or something like that. So what are your thoughts about calories? Let's just get on that, because that's one of Barkay's favorite topics. I hear him ranting and screaming about calories and stuff like that. And I understand that they're not the end all to everything, like some people say, but I think there's like a lot of things, there's a lot of nuance here.
Yeah, I am very similar with respect to Bart K's philosophy. Of course, I learned a lot of things from him. I didn't just watch his YouTube videos. I watched his Odyssey channel because he has actual lectures and he was a professor. So I said, I might as well watch him. And I had the time. So I did that. So my philosophy is very similar. I get what he's saying, and I say the almost very exact same thing on my channel because I get very meticulous on the channel, and I'm pedantic, and again, it goes along with the act, right? But if we're just using the model, the implications, when people say caloric surplus, they're meaning the amount of food you eat. And that's really what they mean. So if we're just using that model, it's just like what you said. The ability for the body to actually consume an exorbitant, an unrealistically high amount, an excessive, is a better word to use, of meat, which contains protein and saturated fat, but also monounsaturated, mostly monounsaturated, but another day. Saturated fat. The ability to overeat on that is extremely difficult. We've seen it. The only time that you can really overeat on that is if you pair it with carbohydrates, or if you just pair it with something sweet, because it will stimulate your dopamine just as much as sugar in many circumstances. It's something sweet, like stevia or something. Now, I don't know who's going to be putting stevia on their steak. Really, I just mean you're having a Zevia drink or something, Then I've seen that it's much easier to do that, and then you may have issues, of course. But if you're just talking about meat, like the carnivore diet in isolation, animal products like that, which, side note, those studies that you're referring to, that you're referring, other people were referring to, or do refer to, do not look at that in isolation. They don't normally look at meat consumption in isolation. They raise saturated fat consumption in these people, or at least they tell them to. That's another important detail. They tell them to. And then they don't tell them to elide or omit anything else. So you can keep sugar and all that stuff in. And then, fatty liver development, or signs of inflammatory markers increase or something. Well, was it looking at meat consumption in isolation? Was it looking at other animal products in isolation? No, it wasn't. Maybe it was, but usually those studies that show an increase in fatty liver, there's a catch. I see it. For example, we know that if you consume fat and glucose together, that in many circumstances can raise your glucose more than if you just ate the sugar and no fat alongside it. The biochemistry, the cross inhibition of sugar and fat into a cell, it can cause a pool in the bloodstream of sugar. Your solutions are to either remove the fat or remove the thing that's unnecessary, which is the glucose, and get the exact same effect. So those things, I've seen the fatty liver thing. Try and eat that much fat to cause fatty liver. And by the way, the fat concerned is metabolized differently than glucose. So who's to say that fat would be immediately transmuted into fat that's stored in the liver, really is what I should say. Because typically fatty liver is caused by the transmutation of glucose into fat. It's carbohydrates being converted into fat. And fructose being immediately transmuted to fat in the liver. So all these things can cause that to occur. I struggle to find anything that indicates that saturated fat in isolation, to be reductionist, can be reduced to being a cause of fatty liver disease in caloric excess. Because once again, it goes back to how I just opened up, which is try and eat that much fat, especially if it's alongside protein. It's going to be very difficult for you, I would suspect.
Yeah, if you listen to like guys like Ben Bickman, they'll say that in the absence of a insulin sufficient or hyperinsulinemic environment, it's very challenging to store really anything. And that's classically using the example of a type 1 diabetic who they can literally, without insulin, they can eat 10,000 calories a day and starve to death. They will literally just excrete all of their energy will leave them. And so there's a lot of things going on there for sure. Let me ask you about, so you have this acrimonious channel. I'll be honest, I haven't seen it. I don't get to spend a lot of time I spend a lot of time on social media putting my own stuff up there, but I don't get the time to consume much of it. What has been that response? What does your family think about you eating this all meat diet and being this guy pissing people off on the internet? Has there been is it all good or is there some bad or what's that like?
Okay, so I'll answer the family thing second, because most of my family some of my family watches my video content, but it's mostly other people. So their response has been, ironically, it's overwhelmingly positive. I think it's because I'm sparking this feeling inside people, the frustration. I'm like, they're living vicariously through my frustration on my videos. I think that's a big part of it. And so it's feelings that people have all been feeling, but then they finally find this person like me that's been speaking it very brazenly and in a crass way, just completely dispassionately, which is not dispassionate, but to be fair, without hesitation. That's what I really should say. And I think they like that. There's a difference. Whenever I post YouTube shorts, they're overwhelmingly negative, and it's because it's a totally different audience. It's like the TikTok crowd are the people that view YouTube shorts, and it's TikTok and Instagram Reels and all that. Most comments I've seen are negative on those platforms. On long form content, which is what I prioritize now, not because of the hate I was getting, it was really because posting YouTube shorts can interfere with the regular performance of a channel. Long form content, it's overwhelmingly positive. I do get some comments here and there that are saying that, once again, they're saying things that they're acting like I don't know this. They're saying, "You sound really pretentious." And I go, "Yes, that's exactly the point." In my comment section, when I interact with people, it's the exact opposite. They can even just scroll down in the comment section and see how I talk to people. It's totally different. And telling me that I'm arrogant, it's like, yes, on the videos, yes, et cetera, et cetera. I get a lot of visceral replies. It is the vast minority. In terms of my family, with respect to their opinions about my channel, but also my diet was first commented on negatively by my mom at first. It wasn't extremely cut and dry, like that's wrong. I remember telling her what I was doing, and she said, she's doing the dishes and she's going, "That can't be healthy." I'm going, that's what I thought too. That's what I thought too. And we'll see. But then the more I started talking to her about it, she put trust in what I had learned. And maybe it was just because of the way that I was explaining things, because many people, they may know a lot, but if they don't know how to actually articulate it to the other person, a lot of times it may still look like they don't know what they're talking about. So it's not as, enticing. So I don't know what it was, but I know that she felt that it was appropriate to trust me. And she still continues to feel like it's appropriate to trust me. Now she asks me questions on stuff and I go, okay, I'll answer it to the best of my ability. No one else has actually commented on it. The only person that commented on it, and he was the first person to comment on it, was my dad. We both adopted it and we're learning the same thing at the same time. So he's on my side. He loves my content. He watches all of it as soon as it's uploaded and he comments on them and stuff. Well, in person. He doesn't comment it on the videos. He said that it would look a little weird because we have the same exact name. It would look like I was commenting on my own video. He doesn't do that. But there's a few other people that watch my content. My grandfather does, and he enjoys it. He says that it flies over his head, but he enjoys watching me on the video. So they like my content. The one thing that I want to add, and I think this is funny, the people that don't like it, that are close to me, were previous friends in high school. So they liked me in high school, and then they see that I'm posting videos, and the first thing that one of them in particular did was say, to my other friend that was helping me out with it, he said, "I don't know why you're helping Eddie out with it. He's not going to be successful. I don't even know what the point is of this." He doesn't have any claims to back up what he's saying. It was just attack after attack. And then I keep growing, and then they remain, they basically cut me off. In other words, I think that's pretty funny because it's like, it's always the ones closest to you. They always got to find some way to try to discourage you from doing what you're doing. That's just a side note. That's irrelevant, really. If you're wondering what the main response has been to my channel in the public realm, it has been overwhelmingly positive, which is a good thing. I can't promise that'll be the case the more I grow. Hopefully it does, because I don't want to have to deal with all that. But I knew what I was getting into whenever I started this up. It's not easy. It's like politics, dealing with all the people that just completely, they never say any of those things to your face, but it's not like it doesn't still get to you, or it can't still get to you, even if they're not saying it to your face. But
yeah,
anyway.
You can't. If you go out to please everybody, you're going to be sadly disappointed, including yourself. Yeah. But one of the things, you're 20, I'm close to 60. I've got a very different perspective on life. I'm in a different place in my life. The audience that I appeal to is probably different than your audience. You'd mentioned that most of the people in your sort of peer group eating a lot of plants, we're seeing it being shoved down everyone's throat. I imagine, I don't know what influences you, because I pay attention to different things, but I suppose you've got this whole push to save the planet, eat bugs, eat plants, eat soybeans. How did you feel like you were maybe aggressively propagandized into that way as someone who's come up through this time? And where do you think your generation, whether it's maybe Generation Z, I think, I don't know, what's the story with that? Where are we going to go with that?
From my personal perspective, I never felt that until I started to look into things. Whenever I wasn't looking into health at all, and even whenever I started to become symptomatic, I never really thought to look at health at first. So even then, I never felt like it was vehemently trying to be inculcated into my brain, like in a conditioning fashion, like, hey, plants good, meat bad, meat bad. My dad, whenever I was growing up with him, and everyone else around me, my family, were the ones that were saying plants are good for you. Like, it was just a fact of reality. It was an axiomatic, yep, that's just the way things are. And so I don't remember being conditioned into believing it, but that's what conditioning is. It's from the time that you're sentient and conscious that you're told things. So when I started to realize that how dystopian it actually was, because that's what it is, in my opinion, it is a dystopian sort of propaganda movement. I started to realize that when I started to look into the whole, really was the Dave Asprey kind of thing and the Stephen Gundry route that I had gone to. And it wasn't exactly what I would deem now to be optimal, that approach, but it was more than optimal, more optimal than what it was before. And that's when I started to learn about those things, because they talked about the lies. They talked about a lot of lies. And I was thinking, why are they lying? And of course, at the time I was thinking, well, I don't know how to interpret the science myself. And even now I'm still learning that respect. I'm learning the hard sciences first. I think statistics is one of the hardest areas of mathematics. I'm going to save that for a little later. But even back then I was thinking, I don't know how to interpret it. So how do I know that you're telling the truth? I was still skeptical. But once again, desperation. Take a shot every time I say that word. But I still, therefore, due to desperation, took their advice to heart. And I started to really wake up to the whole dystopian message. And then it was 100%, my eyes were 100% open whenever I went into the carnivore crowd. And I follow your page on Instagram, that you post a lot about that. Like the propaganda element of the antagonistic, let's say, movement, the plant-based movement. And it's scary. People are being misled into believing that not only are plants more indicated for human consumption than things like animal products, but they're actually a more ethical approach. They're preying on people's emotions as well. And that's a huge issue, I think, in and of itself. If you want to beguile people into your ideology, sometimes facts aren't enough. Appeal to their emotion. Make them feel like they're a bad person if they eat meat. And that was the biggest. I was thinking, wow, that's a huge leap. But we've been seeing that since 2012, because that was really when the vegan movement began to be really popular. And so now it seems that I've seen this argument, and this may be irrelevant, but I think it's important to mention that there's this argument that carnivores are just the antagonistic approach. They're a retaliatory force to veganism, which I thought I can understand where people are coming from, but if they understood, especially people, it's not all people. There's people within the carnivore space that treat it like that, sure. But the people that I follow, I don't follow those people because I don't like that. So you're just choosing a side. This isn't about sides or choosing sides, because getting to the truth isn't about choosing sides. If you really scrutinize it, I think carnivore is not that approach. There's the anti-scientific, dogmatic, propagandist approach from one side, the veganism, plant-based side. Not all of them, but... And then there's the other side, the carnivore side that's going, okay, let's actually scrutinize that data. Let's actually look at what your claims are. Let's see if we can disprove any, because that's how science is done. You try and disprove everything. You don't try and prove everything and stop people from disproving things. And then you arrive at carnivore in many circumstances that way. So no, I don't think carnivore is a retaliatory approach to veganism. I do not think that it is just as anti-scientific and propagandistic as veganism or the plant-based movement. I think that the veganism, plant-based movement is dystopian because they do fit those characteristics.
Eddie, I'm going to have to stop here. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but and I could certainly develop and talk about this particular topic ad infinitum and ad nauseum for some people, but tell people where to go to find out where your channel is, whatever your social media handles are, where you want to send people.
Yeah, so I'm primarily, at the moment, active on YouTube. You can search me two different ways. You can just search my name, Edward Goeke, Goeke, or you can search up my username, which is e.goeke_ in the search bar on YouTube. My handle on Instagram is the same as e.goeke_. On Twitter, X, formerly known as Twitter, I am at Goeke Eddie. And then on TikTok, I wouldn't even bother following me on TikTok, but if you want to, it's also e.goeke_. It may be e.goeke14. I don't even know. I don't post on TikTok anymore. But whenever I start up again, I'll probably be taken down because that's typically what happens on TikTok. But we'll see what happens with that. We'll see if I even start uploading again. But those are the platforms that I am active on at the moment. And if you want to, for any viewers that are watching that would like to do this, I have a Patreon page to get exclusive content, early uploads and stuff like that, which is just my name at Eddie Goeke. So that would be, and once again, it's Goeke. That's how you spell it.
Awesome, Eddie. Thank you very much for spending your time. I'll go find one of those pages and give it a follow. And let's talk again sometime because there's a lot of ground we could still potentially cover. So thanks for doing this. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah,